Hello and welcome to today's episode on Lokad TV, Dusting the ERP Market. We will be exploring how the ERP market has indeed been developing in the last decades, but also stagnating. And we are lucky enough to be joined by Fabien Pinkaers, the CEO and founder of Odoo, one of Europe's very few unicorns based in Belgium. Fabien, could you please give us a short introduction of yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm Fabien. I'm the founder and the CEO of Odoo. I started the company a few years ago. We are now close to 2,000 people, and my resume is basically very simple. I only did Odoo.
And Fabien, so when you founded Odoo in 2005, there was this, and still is, an ongoing problem that smaller businesses, they really are lacking resources, right, to basically get the business tools that they need to manage their internal processes. But how did you kind of plan initially to tackle this competitive landscape at that time?
Yeah, it's clear that we started with the feeling that the small and mid-sized companies doesn't have the right tools. They don't have. They still have a lot of administrative tasks. They have a lot of repetitive tasks. They are overloaded with emails. They don't have access to the information. So they really don't have the right tools, and people suffer from that. When you don't have the right tools, the whole organization is totally inefficient. So we wanted to fix that, but it's a very complex problem. It took decades, and it's not finished. And we started with this principle that says there is something to do. It's not only about managing the business process like the traditional ERP we are doing, but it's also about if we can bring productivity tools to the employees and the user, we can really change the efficiency of the companies.
Okay, that's very interesting. And so we see now that only about 15% of small to medium-sized businesses are equipped with these integrated management software, but still most are unsatisfied with what they have. And Microsoft and SAP, Joannes, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've invested billions of dollars in this SME market, and yet they have still failed. What do you think that is, Joannes?
That's a complex question. But first, Microsoft has not one solution in this, I would say, landscape. They have something like 4 of them. Under the banner of Microsoft Dynamics AX, they have actually compiled a series of products, and it's one of those few areas where Microsoft has mostly grown through acquisition, which is fairly unusual for this company. But the bottom line is, I believe it is very difficult. It is very difficult. It's surprisingly difficult. And so my own perception of the market was that some company tackled the problem of what has, and again, ERP is a bit a misnomer. It should have been something like ERM, Enterprise Resource Management, because there is, planning is really like a secondary concern. It's clearly not the primary concern of this sort of software. But there was probably, a very large and very successful German company that managed to become super, super large in this segment. And there were a few others that became large. But what I saw was that after this, I would say, initial traction in the 80s and 90s, this domain became slightly stagnant, stagnant. And it didn't benefit from the same degree of innovation that I would say was very noticeable, I don't know, for example, in other areas, such as, let's say, B2C consumer apps, lifestyle apps that really went through a whole series of breakthrough. I would say ERPs, that was a much, I would say, they undergone a lot of evolution, but it was overall, and I'm saying overall, much slower.
And Fabien, do you agree with what Joannes is saying about this evolution of the ERP system has become more and more stagnant now, or the market has become more stagnant in the solutions that they offer?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do agree that despite the fact that they invested billions, the key players invested billions to reach the small and the mid-sized market, the equipment rate is super low. And the main reason for me is that there is a big complexity in small and mid-sized companies that they have a lot of needs. They do need accounting, manufacturing, inventory, they have a website, they need supply, they have a supply chain, they work in different countries.
So basically same needs as the big companies.
Yes, the same needs, except they need more agility. It's not all about managing the process. They need a solution that is flexible and agile. But on top of that, they don't have the large budget and the time that the large companies have. And that makes the thing very complex. And I used to say that we don't have competition because what we try to do is to crack something that nobody succeeded to crack. It's more a technical challenge than a go-to-market challenge, I would say. And that's where the complexity is delivering all they need and making it simple and affordable.
And by the way, I can really relate to this problem. Because although Lokad is only, the success of Lokad is only a tiny fraction of the success of Odoo, I was faced tackling supply chains with the exact same sort of problems. Supply chain optimization, it's not because you're small that you have problems that are fundamentally very different. You still have all the, I would say, statistical patterns, seasonality, extra, they exist no matter the size of your business. The sort of constraints such as how much shelf space do I have, or the sort of MOQs, minimal order quantities that are enforced by my suppliers. Again, they exist. Those sort of constraints exist whether you're small or large, indifferently. And the sort of problem that Lokad faced was indeed, and that's very, and I see really the parallel was when I started, when I created Lokad a decade ago. To perform this sort of supply chain optimization, we were faced by the fact that simplified version of the software were just not working, because actually most of the problem was still there. There was just a different trade-off in the sort of how much robotization and how much agility do you want to have in your solution. But otherwise, it was indeed, exactly as you pointed out, a very, very technical problem that was very much, I would say, unsolved on the market. And that's very much like I feel still nowadays at Lokad, is that we operate really on the specific field of predictive supply chain optimization. But most of the days, I feel like most of the problem that we are touching have barely been scratched by anybody's, on the market.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of similarities that can be drawn between, Odoo and Lokad in the sense that...
Besides the fact they are 100 times, larger than us. But
besides that, sort of Odoo in the ERP market is kind of like Lokad in the supply chain sort of solutions market, that we try to sort of approach things differently, and like in the sense that there are no direct competitors.
Yeah, I mean, more than the difference, I feel, and I think that was also the sort of style of founder, is that, Fabien, correctly if I'm wrong, but you are a fairly technical founder as well. I think that played a part into kind of getting something that was working.
Yeah, I'm a developer, so I'm very technical, and clearly it's important because it's a technical challenge. It's not a challenge that you can fix by investing millions or with marketing. Otherwise, the others would have succeeded. And the reason nobody succeeded is because it's extremely complex technically.
Am I correct in the understanding that kind of the average ERP integration can cost somewhere around $40,000?
It all depends on the size of the company.
Yeah, on average speaking, if we compare that to Odoo managed to achieve the same for only about $4,000, which has made it kind of the leading company, and especially in developing countries.
Yeah, so to compare the price, you should have a look at the price of the service and the price of the subscription. On the subscription, it's easy because the numbers are well known. We are between $6 and €18, depending on the countries, where the average of the others key players ERPs are around €180 per user and per month. So we are basically close to 10 times cheaper than the others. Of course, they sometimes discount a bit, but it's an order of magnitude lower. On the service side, I would say we are closer to 2 times, 3 times the price of the other, but it grows very fast depending on the complexity of the project. If the project is simple, I would say like a CRM, just a CRM or an accounting software, I would say we will have services slightly comparable than the other. But as soon as you need more applications, the others have reached very quickly their limits, and they need integration with different software, with the point of sale, with the e-commerce, with social marketing that are usually not part of the ERP. and their budget explodes where all those things are standard in Odoo. So as soon as the project gets a bit bigger or a bit more complex, the price of the service is massively decreased with Odoo. And obviously, it depends on who is offering the service. So different companies, because we have a lot of partners all around the world, have different strategies. Some are more expensive but do more customized service. Others are more affordable but they do more standard. So it also depends on your implementation methodology.
And speaking of this kind of high cost of ERP systems, so Joannes, for example, Netsuite. Netsuite is very high cost, but don't they also have kind of very high operating costs as well? And because of all the kind of massive computing powers that they need?
So you see, when you say that you have something that is lower priced, and I think that's the case of Odoo, is that it's not a pricing thing. It's not, they are not cheaper because they decided that the license would be of a lower price. I mean, they're even open source, so technically if you want to run, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you can actually download the code and just run it, you know, for free, technically. But so the thing is, you have to look at the real cost involved, and depending how you structure your technology, you will have a lot of costs that emerge from the very design of your tech. So, for example, if you start by having a technology where you're exceedingly dependent on first a relational database that is itself very expensive, like for example, let's say an Oracle database, and you're very, very dependent and you're relying extensively on this product, then you kind of by design end up with a lot of cost. But then if on top of that, your design is kind of slightly antagonizing your database layer, and so you need actually a lot more, then you incur a lot of cost. And then we can go on and on. And then if you, for example, for your screen, that all those things can cascade, because if you start having something that antagonizes your database layer, then maybe you are going to start cutting corners in your user interface. And so you end up with a user interface that has some issues that you can't really fix without blowing up your database budget. And so you end up with something that is that has a lower productivity, and that raises your cost again. But that's the sort of things that are diffuse costs. It's not as simple as saying this price per user that Fabien was quoting. And yet all those things pile up. And I believe there has been, at least for some companies, that was what I was saying. This domain has been very stagnant on average. I'm not saying that there is no outliers, but that's. I believe that one of the key driver of truly innovative companies in this ERP market is to try to find ways, innovative ways, to basically revisit all those constraints and do a lot more. So that would be obviously you don't want to have at the core of your software something like Oracle database. That's obviously at Netsuite, now that they have been acquired by Oracle, that's probably never going to happen. But more than that, it's about how do you design something that is very lean, where your workload is not getting out of the roof, so that you can keep all those costs fairly low, and you can even afford to build user interfaces that feel good, for the users. And when I say feel good, which turns into are actually quite productive and agile. I mean, again, that's my perception of the way I kind of understand this market and the sort of driver that make it ticks in terms of, I would say, development-wise.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I would add that the cost for me is directly related to the capabilities or non-capabilities of the software, because that's where the cost starts to increase. And when the software is not able to deliver some features, then you need to integrate different software, and then the costs grow rapidly. But if the software can cover a lot in standard, you can keep your costs very low.
And Fabien, so if we look at the kind of how the big tech giants have evolved over the years within ERP, because we see, do you agree, Joannes, that we see this tendency that the user experience tends to stagnate quite a lot? After about 20 years, this sort of ERP curse? That's
something that is very fascinating, I would say. I've been, it's not the main, I would say, activity of Lokad. It's like a very, very niche segment in what we're doing. But I'm still routinely doing technical audit, parts of due diligence for venture capitalists. I never took VC funding for Lokad, but I managed to actually to routinely sell missions for them that are just tech audits. And the interesting thing is that when I audit a startup, I can usually date, the year at which the company was founded by just looking at their stack and the way they look at the problem. So it's very interesting. It's as if a company is founded in 2014 and then it kind of pretty much freeze all their practices and tech stack. It's not always the case, but it's frequently the case.
It's a pattern.
It's a pattern, exactly. And what I see is that some of the very successful vendors, at some point seems to kind of give up on what Fabien described as, the ambition to have a very, very good product. So they are very innovative. And by the way, I believe, for example, Netsuite was massively innovating around, year 2K. They were literally probably the first web ERP that had a very, accessible web-based user interface. At the time, that was really, really disruptive. Nowadays, I mean, having a web interface is pretty much like a given. So it's not, I would say, something that is considered as, a point of differentiation anywhere. The bar has changed. But what I see is that if I look, and I've been, working, for example, with Netsuite for over a decade now, is that there is very, very little change from, the Netsuite of a decade ago and the Netsuite of today. And this is frequently happening for many software products where after 2 decades they kind of my perception is that people just move on in their life or whatever, and you end up with fairly stagnant products.
Fabien, do you agree with this idea that sort of the more the company grows, the higher the tendency to basically, well, growing complexity, growing processing, but at the same time become less and less automated and essentially then stagnant in its development as well?
Yeah, I do agree. I believe Odoo is an exception because you are still very focused on the product, but I do agree that's what happened. If you look at the market 10 to 20 years ago, the challenge at that time was to consolidate your accounting, to just have your financial data correct from different activities and to organize your business flows. And that's where the traditional ERPs are still today. They do the business flow, they consolidate all the financial and accounting data from manufacturing, inventory, and so on, but that's it. They don't go on e-commerce. They are not customer-centric. They are accounting-centric. They don't allow a lot of agility. Everything is complex. They don't do the modern things like social marketing, point of sale. So clearly, they missed on a wave of evolution. And I believe also that it's because they get too big. And when you get too big, you have layers of middle managers that are not expert developers or expert in the product. So you just defocus yourself from what matters. And what they did well at the beginning, which is integrating the ERP, integrating sales, purchase, accounting, manufacturing, and inventory, they stopped there. They could have gone further and tackled the issues of today. Now today, marketing is important, e-commerce is important, point of sales are super critical. But they just stop there, and the rest they do with acquisition, with integration, with third-party tools. So they clearly missed an opportunity, I believe. The
problem is that with acquisition is that, enterprise software is not exactly missable. So when you have an acquisition, you end up with a separate stack of tech, which is slightly, but consistently, completely mismatching your other stack. You see, it's just, again, there are ways, having a very good product, especially when you have enterprise software where it's all about complexity management, it frequently boils down to be very, very consistent across the board in everything that you do. You don't want to have surprises, technical surprises everywhere, because that's going to create pain points and friction. Suddenly, first for the software engineers, because they are going to stumble upon something and say, this is weird, this is completely unlike the rest of my stack. How do I deal with this thingy that I have to, extend or something? And then for the user interface, that's also some kind of bizarre thing that is going to keep the user puzzled, because suddenly, the user was kind of used to a certain way of doing things. It's intuitive, but it's not like intuitive if you're born into that. You're kind of, you get used to a certain way of doing things, and then you have a piece of the software that feels like completely foreign. It could be, a valid way of doing things. It's just that it's not the same way that you're doing things in the other things. And so, by the way, and when you have this acquisition, what you have is kind of across the board misalignment. And it's difficult. It's difficult because then if you want to fix that, what you have is essentially steam engines that are operating at full speed on both sides. So you're trying to fix, the machine while it's running, and that's very difficult. It's very difficult, and so that's why I believe the most successful, sort of products, I would say, I believe in the field of enterprise software are very rarely the results of gluing together acquisitions. More frequently, very successful products, or I would say beautifully designed products were really did grow organically and not by just having pieces brought,
kind of
glued together,
outside.
across the year.
So Fabien, what's your kind of view on acquisitions for Odoo in the future?
We don't do acquisitions. Yeah. We build, we don't buy.
That summarized kind of what I said. Yeah.
No, what we do is building stuff, not buying stuff. And it's the only way to reach the level of simplicity and affordability that the SMEs need. You can't have a complex stack, an aggregated stack of different things, and just put some lipstick on it to make it beautiful. That just doesn't work. To have something clean, it has to be clean from the ground up.
But I was under the impression that you could just buy, a blockchain startup and an IoT startup, put that in Odoo, and then you would have a blockchain IoT-powered ERP or something?
Or maybe virtual reality too.
Yes.
Fabien, what's your kind of plan then as Odoo? I mean, Odoo has been growing crazy fast. So what's your sort of plan to avoid this ERP curse that when you do become a really, really big company, how do you avoid becoming eventually stagnant?
It's easy. We always think for the long term. It's one of the reasons why we are not publicly listed, is because we want to continue thinking about the long term and not about the quarterly results or the sales or whatever. So the whole company is driven by just building a better product and building a better service. So we do a lot of things to keep the company culture the way it is, and to be sure that we are focused on but as long as I am mostly focused on the product, the rest of the company, I believe, follows. The key is just saying no to a lot of things. Just saying no to new technologies that we could buy, or sales opportunities who could divert the company from more main targets. And so by being focused and be sure that everyone is aligned on the same focus, which is building a better product in the company, it just works, and I believe it can scale. At least we scaled it to 2,000 people.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, because from my perspective, you see this, I'm facing this at a small scale, but the same sort of problems. And indeed, saying no to your teams, I'm not sure how it feels for you, but at times it is very difficult, because for the rest of the team, it feels like you're falling behind. You see, because obviously, when you want to tackle something that is a bit new, frequently it would be faster with a very short-term horizon, to just glue together in your solution some other piece of software. But that's a very short-sighted thing, because suddenly you over time you have to maintain it. It was not exactly designed in ways that are completely aligned with the rest of your stack, etc. So you frequently end up creating more problems when you do it that way. But for example, at Lokad, at some point we went into deep learning, and we at some point had inside Lokad we had integrated TensorFlow, which is a beautifully designed deep learning open source library from Google. But the problem is although it is an excellent product, it is aligned, I would say, with pretty much nothing inside what we had built. So at the end, we had to kind of ditch this piece of tech, although it is one of the leading deep learning tech, to redevelop our own, which was a slower process, to end up with something that is arguably inferior. We are not going to to win against Google on, I would say, on the deep learning front, but to end up with something that was way more integrated and much, I would say, more maintainable and much more agile inside the technology. So that's just one example, but where it say, you know, when you say saying no, and you were saying it's kind of easy for me. It's one of the hardest things that I have is to manage to, you know, to motivate the team to not take the easy road, but I would say the simple road that can be longer but more rewarding if you look, you know, years down the road.
I used to say that every manager knows what to do. Everyone has ideas of things to do, but only the best knows what we should not do. Only the best have the big picture clear enough to know where we should focus and avoiding the rest so that we can go further on what we focus on.
And yet, I still understand that you don't really have this kind of typical hierarchy, right, of managers above managers above managers, but more this kind of horizontal structure where everyone really kind of has a large impact, large responsibility on the company. And what was the kind of idea behind this sort of atypical company structure?
So we do have a hierarchy, but it's a bit flatter than traditional companies. One of the things we do is instead of centralizing responsibilities on middle manager, we distribute the responsibilities. So let me give you an example. Let's say a R&D department, but I could do the same example in sales or services. It's the same everywhere at Odoo. But let's say in R&D department, you have plenty of developers. And when you have a developer that is good, most companies, what they do is they promote him as a manager. And then at the beginning, he's happy, first 2 years. But then he'll do things he doesn't like, managing people, planning, budgets, hiring, dismissing people, just management job. And after a few years, he won't be good enough in development because he didn't do it since a long time. We don't do that. In all our departments, people continue to do their job. So a developer will always do their job. And instead of having middle manager who have all the responsibilities of budget, specification, coaching, and so on, we distribute the responsibility to a lot of developers. So all our developers have 80% of their time as being a developer, so they become expert because they can do that for the long term. And 20% of their time, they receive one of the responsibility. So some people are responsible for the recruitment. Other people are responsible for the coaching of the new employees we recruit. Others for the training sessions we organize. Others are responsible for the specifications and testing the tasks that have been done. And so instead of having middle manager who have all the responsibilities, we only have people who do things and that become very good because they do things for the long term. And we distribute responsibilities among different people, but only a small part of their time.
And Fabien, I have to ask, so Odoo has also had quite a few name changes throughout the years. So we started off with Tiny ERP, then Open ERP, then Odoo. So what's the next one? When is that going to be? I mean, it's been working
You've made 10x in growth every time you were changing your name. So we were kind of guessing that the next time you change your name, you would make another 10x growth.
No, it's more like I did 2 times the mistake of choosing a name that means something. So I won't do 3 times the same mistake, so Odoo doesn't mean anything. It's more. So initially, a tiny ERP was not very good to enter in the US market because it's tiny, and in America you have to be big. And after Open ERP was not positive because we don't want to be compared with traditional ERPs. We are more the suite of business app. We have plenty of companies that just use Odoo for the accounting or just to create a website or a CRM. And obviously, if you use all the apps together, you have an ERP, but we don't want to be compared with the bloated, complex ERP systems. So it was a bad name too. So we had to change the name. And because I did 2 times the mistake of selecting a name that means something, we just pick a name that doesn't mean anything for the third name of the company, which is Odoo.
All right, I'm going to have to wrap it up here, you guys. But thank you so much, Fabien, for joining us today. Truly interesting discussing the ERP market together and seeing how Odoo has really challenged the status quo that was initially there.